everybody. Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. Today, I have Tracy Royce. Tracy Royce of Real Estate is a full-time flipper, landlord, and rehabber with a background in distressed real estate. She went from working for other investors to build her own business, brand, and financial freedom through real estate. She vividly shared her journey on social media to encourage others to invest in themselves and real estate tour. And Tracy has also been hosted on multiple different channels such as Bigger Pockets, Forbes, etc. Welcome to our show today, Tracy.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. It's my joy to be here. Thank you.
That's awesome. So Tracy, we always ask our guest about when you're thinking back in your childhood upbringing, who is the person that influenced you the most to help you become the entrepreneur who you are today?
So it's funny when I think about this because my parents are the opposite of entrepreneurial, and in fact, they had suggested maybe I join the military. If you ever imagine that, that would not fit. So it's ironic, I think, that I went this path, and really, I want to say when I worked behind the scenes for other investors, they probably had more of an impression on what I felt like I wanted to do for a career and for myself rather than my actual family. My aunt and uncle did own a packaging business here in Phoenix. And so I worked for them when I was a teenager over one summer, and that was kind of cool to see, business ownership and supply chain and that sort of stuff. But I would say overall, honestly, it wasn't until I got in this field and really had exposure to people that I worked for at the time that became kind of de facto mentors, to be honest.
Yeah, because it's like a life just sends us different kind of mentors. That's awesome. And then, so did you always flip homes?
No, my progression has gone from working behind the scenes for other investors to having my license to work within the business models that they had. And then I never had my license to be an agent, like a traditional agent. That was really never in my desire or wheelhouse. But with the advent of short sales and when the market was crashing and, the real estate market was melting, short sales were all the rage. Distressed property is really where I cut my teeth, and the same sort of real estate that I worked with other real estate investors. So distressed and creative real estate is really my background. And so then as I started to work for more real estate investors behind the scenes, eventually I decided to branch off on my own, did short sales, started doing a little bit of flipping, and then eventually got into like the heavier construction side. And then what you see online now is the evolution of that. I do not have my license anymore. All I do is fix and flip homes, buy rentals, and rehab properties.
Gotcha. That's quite a bit work over there. I gotta ask this. It sounds like a really stereotype, but I'm just curious. How is it like being a woman in this industry? Because a lot of flipper, you naturally think about construction workers, and they have nowhere image matches it. For our listener who is not kind of watching this on the YouTube, Tracy is this beautiful lady, over here. So it's a little bit far from the traditional construction worker kind of image people have.
I'm not going to show up with a goatee and like a hat, maybe the hat, not the goatee. Yeah. Honestly, full transparency, it wasn't something that really had ever occurred to me as I started to evolve into doing more of the construction. And I've been really open about what that looked like. In terms of like other podcasts, and people ask me about that. I'm like, I didn't have a background in construction when I worked for other investors. That was truly something that I had to learn mostly on my own. And it's really taught me to traverse how do you become a better leader to be able to lead people to your vision if you don't have a background in the thing that you're supposed to lead them to. Now, I did obviously gain a lot of education through being on site and watching YouTube University and asking the guys a lot and not being afraid to ask questions, because everybody starts somewhere. And so getting through that discomfort of them knowing that I'm not a general contractor versus this is what I want, and doing as much research as I possibly can so I can speak as intelligently to it at the time. And then eventually, like something that really cool that still strikes me to this day, Eliza, is like my framer came up to me the other day. I'm on site doing something, and he comes up and he's like, Tracy, I have a question for you. I'm like, okay. So he starts asking me questions, and then I was like, well, why don't we do this instead of this? And then I asked him what he would do, and then I was like, well, yeah, so let's do it this way. He goes, you know what? You're right. So it's really cool when you start to learn enough to where your trades are asking you questions, but these guys, they're professionals. They've been doing it forever. And so, to me, being on the construction end of it wasn't so much like I have to memorize the like International Building Code, the 2018 book, it was
Yeah.
more about how can I shorten the learning curve and be the best leader that I can. And
Mhm.
so when people ask, what is it like to be a woman in this industry? I have honestly dealt with less of it's a girl leading this versus I didn't
Mhm.
know as much about construction. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you, when people see you work really hard and that you're trying, like I even learned Spanish so I could talk to my Hispanic workers.
Amazing.
So, but I'm not fluent, but it's like I'm trying. And so
Yeah.
it's like
It's the effort.
it's the effort. And I'm like, sometimes they want to speak Spanish and sometimes they want to speak English, but it's like, it's putting in that effort, I think. And then I'm very clear on my instructions. I know my scope of work. There's
Mhm.
a budget that needs to be stick to. I'm on site a lot. I round up all the trades. And so I think that when people realize you pay your bills on time, they know when they're getting paid, you're a reliable and
Mhm.
ongoing source of work for them. You treat people fairly, you communicate well. It really becomes less about like your gender or your background
Yeah.
or your race, color, religion. So however that applies to your audience that's listening, that thinks like, hey, I don't
Mhm.
have a lot of background in XYZ, or
Yeah.
maybe I'm the wrong shade of something to really be taken seriously, or I'm the wrong gender, please take my slice of uncomfortability turned to confidence in that it can take some time, and just learning to traverse like, how do I become a better leader is maybe the
Mhm.
better question to frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that oftentimes when you're just doing it without overthinking about something, then putting a little bit, colors into there, it may be just in your head. Yeah.
That's a great, and that's such a, and we do that to ourselves regardless. If you show up in a room and you're like, gosh, everyone here is 6 feet tall and I'm only, whatever height you are, I'm only 5'5", and everyone's different than me. You internalize, and I think you kind of put that out into the world versus like, look at me, I'm so cute and I'm so strong and I'm so capable. It's really how I think part of what you put out there. And if people don't like you and they don't want to work with you because you're a woman or because you don't look right to them, shake the tree and find someone else. There's just so
Right.
many people, you don't need to deal with that.
Yeah, I love that. And so that kind of bleeds into a little bit more. You talked about building a life and real estate investing business with vision. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How does people go about it to build a vision, like following your step to reach financial independence or the freedom of choice, essentially? Yeah.
So I'm sure it's something that you had to create and cultivate as well. And even if you didn't know the process by which you were following it, I'm sure you reverse engineered what your lifestyle wanted to look like in terms
Mhm.
of, well, how much money would I need to make if I wanted to buy a Winnebago and travel across the US 300 days a year? Or
Yeah.
I just want to be able to live XYZ sort of lifestyle. I don't need Lamborghinis and designer everything. So once you start to benchmark what that number is, then you can start to think about, well, how many rentals do I have to own? And how many hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars per rental do I need to be able to
Mhm.
get to that number every month? And it can take years. And I think sometimes people look at social media and they think oh, these other people are overnight success, and you don't realize like it can take some time to cultivate. But if you become more clear on what does an ideal day look like to me,
Right.
I love what I do. It doesn't feel like work at this point because, for instance, I let go of my real estate license. I just don't. That just wasn't bringing me joy. I rather
Right.
pay someone to do that. But being able to be clear on what brings me joy, what am I good at, where's my genius zone, what can I delegate, and what do I really not need in my life at all, and how do I
Mhm.
combine these things to make an income that fits the lifestyle that's bespoke for me, which could
Mhm.
look very different on very different people. And once you start to let go of the idea of, I have to work 80 hours a week to be successful, or I have to
Mhm.
close 100 houses a year as an agent to be able to be successful, or I have
Mhm.
to do 100 flips a year to be a successful flipper, and really start to look at, well, what do I need to do to fit this version of what looks good for me and my lifestyle that I
Mhm.
want in the next few years.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage people, and I think COVID really brought that out in many people, and I'm sure especially in the real estate community,
Mm.
of when we're working so much to pay the bills, and that's really the only output that we're incentivized to go after, people get burned out, right?
Yeah.
And when you are more passionate and more motivated by what you're doing on a day-to-day basis because you have a bigger reason, which is, for
Mm.
instance, this isn't my dream, but as an instance, like, hey,
Yeah.
can I Winnebago and go travel the world for 300 days a year?
Yeah.
Then everything starts to become a lot more clear where, no, I don't want to have my real estate license, or yeah, I want to do apartments. I don't want to do single family flips.
Right.
So it's kind of a cool thing. I'd really encourage people to go out, go to a fancy resort in your area, or go maybe like to a really nice lunch
Mm.
and have this conversation with yourself and allow yourself to dream a little bit, because you don't realize, I think it's really telling that sometimes that lifestyle that you think is so expensive to live I'm just going to be cliche, like a millionaire's lifestyle, really
Yeah.
doesn't cost as much as you think it might.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said over there, because we had a student of ours which actually wanted that life, maybe not Winnebago, it's just a little travel van. And what she realized was because all these debt equity was sitting in her house. So she sold it and then went on that dream life. So it's totally achievable.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's amazing. Awesome. And Tracy, now I have to ask this, which is, at the current cycle of the economy, what do you kind of see the house flipping? Does that change some of your criteria due to the volatility that's there out in the markets and etc.? As a flipper, what should I be kind of looking at to watch out for?
So the one thing, well, not one thing, there's 100 things, but one of the nice things about real estate that I'm sure you know too, is it moves very slowly.
Mm.
So what we see in the stock market, where, with everything that's going on overseas right now, the market can
Mm.
be up and down a few hundred to a few thousand points every day. It's very reactive. Real
Mm.
estate kind of shrugs that off a little bit, right?
Mm.
And when you boil it down to supply and demand, and then even more hyper microeconomics, what that looks like to me is there's going to be a runway, even if things were to change drastically, which I don't
Mm.
think that they're going to, simply because I'll speak for my market, but I think it is sort of a parallel to a lot of other markets in the US right now.
Mm.
We're so undersupplied, especially with single family residential, that it could be years if we had floods of foreclosures that people love to predict, and all these
Mm.
builders build a bunch of houses. Like we are years and years behind having what we need.
Mm.
So I don't personally see a lot of volatility. Where I see the challenge, though, Liza, is when people are coming in with blank checkbooks to purchase houses at any price, and
Mm.
it really crushes, if not nearly eliminates, margins for
Mm.
people like me that are like local, call it, smaller investors.
Mm.
So that's more challenging. And so sometimes you have to take a risk on what can I do? Can I make this more of, I don't want to say like make it a deal, because I would never like tell people to do that, but just looking at things and underwriting it in different ways. So now I look at things like, can I flip this? Can I rent this? Is this a short-term rental? I don't want to just be a one-trick pony that has to buy at a steep discount, because otherwise I'd be passing on deals. Right. So now as a flipper, I'm looking at things like, can I adjust my output to get a premium for this property? So sometimes if it's like a really cosmetic thing, I might add a few more design features, because one thing I will say, and this isn't to poo-poo on other flippers, but I will say it mostly about like the corporate flippers, is their output is so underwhelming and just ghastly at times. And people are willing to pay for that because they're desperate for product. They just want to move their family in somewhere. And so having a thoughtfully designed, move-in ready, cute designer property commands a premium. And so that's one thing that I'm using to hedge against more competition, is really just doing what I've always done, but it just comes in a little bit handy in this sort of environment.
So adding more value, kind of creating value for yourself, looking at things differently, really help with that in terms of increasing that margin as well.
Well, and to the opposite end, not to play devil's advocate, but there could be times too where you might not need to do much of anything at all. Right? Like if you can clean it up and look at what the market will bear for it, and like a cosmetically redone condition, given that the systems are good, and hopefully you're still delivering a good product regardless. But you might not even need to, and your margin might just be in that and making it turnkey. I'm just person to say, everyone loves the good total rehab, but I'm the first person to say, listen, some of my margins have been just as good on really cosmetic stuff, and that's what the market bears. So
yeah, I love that, because that's what I do with my apartments. We don't go with the heavy value adds because
right. And you guys
it is
have
money.
right. And
Yeah.
when you have to think of it, like I'm at a one product, one design, and you guys are thinking in volume, the door handles you use, the carpet you use, whatever, it can make a huge difference.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so Tracy, can you tell us a little bit more? I think some of our listeners will be very interested, coming from a flipper perspective. What are the things now we kind of talk about adding value? What are some top things that you can add to your home or add it to your investment property that may give you a better ROI? I think the two are kind of really different, because investment property, obviously the ROI is differently calculated. So mostly you deal with is house to sell. So what can I add to my primary homes to add the most value to my house?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. So for instance, the house that I live in now is a townhome. I actually love living in a smaller footprint. So some of the things that I even did in here is I upgraded like the sink, for instance, just did it's a Kraus undermount workstation, where normally you might just do an undermount, 9-inch deep, 30-inch wide sort of stainless steel, little things like that, hidden trash receptacles. I've done I'm trying to think of even some of the upgrades I've done here, but how people live now has adjusted. I think a lot more people are working from home, and doing things in your own environment where it feels more calming, it feels more space efficient, it feels more welcoming, maybe a little bit more designer. DIY has gone off the charts on TikTok and Instagram the last few years for obvious reasons. So I think anything like that can make it feel a little bit more homey. Even a tract home can look more luxurious and designer with, a weekend and some hand tools and some creativity. I don't know if I answered your question directly.
Yeah. I think so too. Yeah, I think it did. And then so is there like any additions, because we always look at like kitchen is like the most piece that people always talk about, like an upgraded kitchen, stainless appliance. It seems to be the cookie cutter things to do, bathrooms and whatnot. But like, is adding addition like something that's a worthwhile, like in your particular market? Because I know like a different market is different.
Sure.
Or adding more bedrooms. I don't know if that's something.
Your kitchen, your kitchen example is, I guess, the most obvious one that I yeah, it is part of it too. And sometimes it's just like, hey, we want to get the best value for things, but when you really think about things that you use multiple times every single day, years and years, your ROI really is in the things like buying better appliances or upgrading your kitchen, space where you spend time with your family every day. And additional square footage if you have the land for it and are able to do it. Certainly a lot of people are really considering that and executing on that, because them selling their home now puts them in the market against all these other buyers, and their money doesn't go as far, and they're competing with all these other people. So there's really, I think, been more of a consideration around, instead of selling my house, how can I make it more designer? How can I make it more me? How can I stylize it to our lifestyle? And if that's adding more to the footprint to add the office now, or a home gym, or a spa room, then so be it. But yeah, absolutely, to answer your question, that is one way that you can add value for sure.
Awesome. Spa room. I have never heard
Yeah,
about that one. Now add that to my list. Yeah, that's awesome. Now let's kind of switch gear a little bit, talk about a little bit about building the business. So we all know doing a flipping business is very labor intensive. So how have you gone through? Can you share us how did you build up a business so you can have time to recording the web, basically a podcast with me right here and this and that? Like, how did that kind of slowly come up, and so that you get more freedom of choice yourself? Yeah.
So that circles back to the question that you started with, which I think was a great way to start this conversation, which is, why is it so important to have a vision for your business? I find a lot of people comment when I do, either like I'm on a panel or something, or when I'm speaking in front of people, and I say, I'm not a high volume flipper. And I have people pull me aside afterwards and say like, hey, thank you, because I thought I had to do 50 flips a year, because a lot of these guys and people are bragging about how much volume they do. When you become more clear on, again, what is this lifestyle that I want to live that's more bespoke to me, that satisfies, you know, what my bills are and then some, how much do you really have to do? And if you want to go above and beyond that, or you want to grow, or you want to evolve or shift or add verticals, fantastic. But having the freedom to decide, do I want to take on these projects? Do I not want to take on these projects? Gave me the bandwidth to still be able to do project management, to do material resourcing, and then be able to do it in a way that I can always handle at least 2 or 3 projects at the same time. And I'm fine. Like, that's more than enough. You know, that's easy enough for me to handle. But I'm very clear on the fact, you know, and the other thing I think is important to note to this conversation is I don't have debt. I was very clear on I'm going to run a debt-free business.
Yeah.
So besides the mortgages that I have for rental properties, I don't have debt.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So
Yeah.
if you're not working on a hamster wheel just to pay the bills, and you've decided, hey, this is what I want my lifestyle to look like, and reverse engineered what that looks like for income and where that income comes from multiple and different sources, then you don't necessarily need to do 100 anything a year. And oftentimes your profits become so marginalized because you have to have so many cogs in the wheel, so many bodies in the seats, so many subscriptions, so many moving parts that I really tip my hat to the people that are able to do that, because that type of leadership and building to get to that point where you're doing that sort of volume is such a difficult feat, and especially with flipping, because
Every
like,
project is different.
about every little project with it being still a good product is very, very difficult. So I tell people, I'm like, listen, right now I'm low volume, and that's fine for me because I get to pick my projects. I'm very clear on what I want and what my output financially needs to be. So there's just not a ton of pressure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that's interesting. Now let's get into this a little bit more. The debt-free model. Isn't it like on TV, people always teach like to do flipping, you can like borrow someone's money, no money down. It was like the entire opposite from there. So how did you arrive to this, you know, against all the other noise in the world with the flippings and all that stuff? How do I arrive to this conclusion to say, hey, I'm going to have a debt-free business? And essentially in real estate, debt-free, that means you're buying this property outright, possibly, and then doing the flipping on.
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm categorizing this correctly. When I do buy a house to flip, I am using debt. Me personally, I do not have debt.
Okay.
So I love using other people's money. I will raise money all day long. I am happy to make money with, you know, my investor partners, people that are armchair investors that just love being able to be a part of, you know, real estate and know that they're getting their money back quickly, oftentimes before our notes due. And then that way I am able to do more projects like that too. And then, you know, people ask too, like how I'm funding properties, and it's always a blend. I still use hard money because I have amazing relationships, and they'll do things with me that they don't offer to other people. And I'm happy to pay a premium. Like I rather make money with my investor friends and partners than keep it all to me and only be able to do, you know, 1 or 2 projects at a time. Like that doesn't make sense. And I'm not a greedy person. Like I rather us all make money together. So that part of it does contain debt, right? Me personally, I don't have debt, but I will say like the business doesn't have debt against like equipment or cars or anything like that. So I will have debt in the interim, and I'll even use 0% APR credit cards for rehab costs, gain the points, and then pay them off at closing, because then you start to rack up points.
That's fun. That's awesome. That's like a leverage to the next level. Awesome. And then so for someone who is kind of just starting out in this business, is there different paths they can choose? And you know, like tell us a little bit more about how you structure your deals. So that sounds like you have investors. So it sounds like there's passive way to invest in this, and there's also the active way to invest this. What's your best advice for people who are starting out on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're first starting off and you're trying to figure out how to get funding, or you're trying to figure out how to even get this deal to work in terms of, well, I don't have the money, so I can't do deals. Please shift that mindset to understand there is so much money in the market right now looking for placement that if you are better at understanding how to underwrite a deal, bring it to the table. You could post it on Facebook group, like a
Yeah.
reader group in your area, and you would have money finding you if you have a good enough deal. Okay.
Nice.
You might have to split it 50-50 the first couple. You might have to take a portion of it if you've never done project management, if you don't know what you're doing on a flip, but you know it's a good deal. And that also makes you a more well-rounded investor to be able to cultivate, hopefully, off-market leads, learn how to underwrite them. Because even as a flipper, I could argue that my time is better spent just to be working on projects, right? And not be worrying about the A to B side on the acquisition. However, I had done that for so long that I understand that side of it. And I also understand how to underwrite deals. And so when I'm raising money, I have to know that like the back of my hand to justify to my investors. So if you're just starting out, please think of something is better than none of nothing.
Yeah, I love that. Yes.
So you might need to partner with people, but then also understand it might, like I use the same presentation for every investor. Like, first of all, we jump on a phone call. I send them a one-page introduction to say like, hey, this is basically my track record. This is what you can expect, just to see if our financial energies align. Like they might want to do a syndication with you. They're like, we don't mess around with single family. We rather just do apartments, right? Okay, great. Like we know we're not a good fit. Otherwise, after I send them the one page, then we jump on an onboarding call. So like my investors are already onboarded before they ever fund a deal, because sometimes I have less than a week from the moment I get a phone call from a referral to actually close on it. I feel like I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but
no, this is great. Yeah.
But if you were just starting out and you're like, well, how do I fund this and how do I do this? I think a lot of times, again, people are shifting it back to me and how do I do this myself, where I'm like, think a little bit more globally, because even advanced investors, you can speak to this, I'm sure, way better than I can. When you guys are dealing with huge apartment complexes, there's a lot of creative capital and partnerships that have to happen, right? Everyone runs out of money at some point, and so you're willing to give up profit share or upside or rev share or preferred interest. Like you have to learn all this. So if you're just starting off and you're like, no, Tracy, I want to do this on my own and I don't want to share, like even advanced investors still do the same thing. So please think a little bit more communally. And then if you get to the point where you can self-fund and save on those costs and increase your margins, great. But I use partners all the time. For me, there's really no reason not to.
Right, exactly. And I think a more advanced investor they leverage more of other people's money, in fact, you know. Because that kind of leverage is like the key, as long as a good leverage. Absolutely.
You know, so like I'm at the point, I have been for a while, where I can typically get 100% of my purchase contract funded, some if not all of my rehab costs, because I have a track record. Again, I present deals the same way every time. I typically pay people off like faster when before the notes due. So I'm a stable, known entity, right?
Yeah, it's the track record and consistent delivering and over exceeding people's expectation that builds it. That's the part that's hard, and that's the part where, because there's money, and I think deals are hard to find, and then not only just the deal, but the team that can operate it in a way that can deliver the returns.
So if you're just starting off, please note, again, like I'm not going, like I want people to understand it can take time, but if you have that mentality in the beginning, it's going to serve you better along the line, because you poignantly put, a lot of times it's like use other people's money, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And also using other people's knowledge, really, if you can, and partnering up and bring value to people, because I think that's actually the more scarce part, which is not the money, it's the experience and the ability to return, I think. So when you first started, why should I invest in you if you have no idea what you're doing, right? So,
like I don't know, because there's no reason.
I'm a good friend, right?
So, exactly.
Exactly.
Money hits the table, and then not something.
So I love that, because it's like about bringing value, as you kind of mentioned before. So Tracy, what is your 5-year midterm goal? You know, if there is one,
my 5-year goal.
5-year goal, or 3 year goal, whatever the midterm is
Yeah.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really love what I'm doing right now. I mean, I feel like I'm in a groove. I have been for a while, and I think that that's part of eliminating things that I could do, but I just learned I wasn't really joyful doing them, and getting to a point where I'm like, wow, I really love what I do. And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I didn't do this, I feel like I would be very unfulfilled and dissatisfied. So I'm sure I'll continue to do this in some part. But maybe just do things a little bit more creatively or in a different way. But yeah, I typically look at stuff maybe a year or two out. To be honest, I used to write 10-year goals and 5-year goals, and
Yeah.
I really don't do that as much. And I think when COVID hit too, nothing changed in the business. Obviously, the real estate market has gone nuts. So I've had a little bit more grace with, I don't know, like maybe I'll
Yeah.
get through 2022 and see where that goes. But I will say teaching has been on my heart. I would love to be able to just put something into the ecosphere that helps people more, because I really do get a lot of inquiries about like teaching or mentoring, and I just don't know what that looks like yet. So I would imagine at some point in the not so distant future, that that'll be a part of the business as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you mentioned about the Airbnb. You talked about, you kind of alluded to different strategies to widen that strategy from flipping and then kind of getting into some other business. And sounds like you have some rental as well to hold. Do you have like some sort of metrics to say, okay, this project I'm going to hold, this project I'm going to do Airbnb, this project I'm just going to do flip? Is there like some sort of threshold or leveling where you decided, or criteria that kind of drives you to one versus the other strategy?
I think with most investors like that parallel a similar business model, sometimes you don't know until midstream what if you're, not to say that you don't know what your exit strategy is, but if it appears to be a good rental, it might not be until midstream where you're like, you know what, maybe I could just use the capital, and I would rather just sell this. Or I'm ready to add another rental and this has great cash flow. Why don't I just go ahead and keep it? Right. So that part of the consideration is, what does that personal investor want to do? I will also say too, I much rather, especially now that I'm using DSCR loans, and for your audience that is listening, it's a loan that's based more on performance rather than just the individual investor. So if you have a really well-performing property, instead of going to Chase Bank, for instance, or even a mortgage broker, especially being a self-employed person, it can be really difficult to get a rental property underwritten. So that way you can have it as a long-term rental. Whereas with the DSCR loan, they will take parts of your personal profile into consideration, but they're really looking at the performance of the property to say, yes, this cash flows all day long, there's tons of equity, will lend against your LLC. And so utilizing that tactic has really opened up, the channels to not have to think about, well, can I put this on my credit? Because you have a max of how much you can do there.
Yeah, so, that's amazing.
I do look at it different ways. And then I had also, to be honest, I'm not huge on the Airbnbs. I've done them before, and the upside is good. But unless you have someone else do all the management, it is really intense.
Labor intensive. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So again, going towards more the passive realm versus staying more the active part.
Well, and that's, and that's from having shifted to a vision of, I really want to have, and this was way before COVID, where I'm like, I loved having the Airbnbs. It was fun for me at the time. I became a super host in a year. Like, it was great. You meet a ton of cool people, but then you also have to deal with, like any business, there's always the 20% that's not enjoyable as much. And then I understood later that it was too detracting, and I was better served focusing on other parts of the business rather than trying to make that extra spiff off of a few of the rentals to test that. And I was just better served flipping them or turning them back into long-term rentals and set it and forget it.
That's awesome. Now, do you have advice to our youngsters, listener of the podcast over here, working towards their financial independence goal? Do you have some advices for that? Like being more financial literate, being more mindful about the choices that they make versus just driven by the income goals?
Right. Yeah, I think you put it perfectly is first mindfulness. I will say too that the amount of knowledge that is out there for free between TikTok and YouTube, Instagram is very short form. So I would defer more back to like YouTube and podcasts like yours. If
Mhm.
you can surround yourself with that rather than people that are, well, gosh, it's different for our generation. And so I'm just going to spend on whatever makes me feel good.
Mhm.
Your decisions that you start now really start to compound. And when you
Mhm.
start to get in your late 20s and early 30s and then into your 40s, like whatever you chose, and I know it sounds really boring right now, but if you can start to make some of those decisions now and understand that I'm going to do something for a short amount of time so I can be very different for the rest
Mhm.
of my life,
Mhm.
and put yourself in groups or education that really supports that mindset.
Mhm.
And then also, some people I think are better served not going to college. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think everyone needs a 4-year degree. And I will speak from the project management and the rehabber and me saying this. We need more trades.
Yeah.
And it used to be a thing where, well, I don't want to be a plumber. I don't want to be, a carpenter. Those are professional trades that make very good money. And if
Yeah.
you also can bring a business sense to it, these guys clear 6 figures a year if they're doing it right.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're looked down upon or it's any different. I mean, you can have a plumbing company and be a millionaire, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Or
Sincerely.
more than that, I know many construction company that owns more employees than we do.
Yeah.
So definitely, absolutely, and that's great advice. And I think perhaps taking a business course and etc. will be
Yeah.
really helpful to just kind of understand the accountings and all that sort of stuff, just to know enough.
Right.
That's
Plus they can take more risks too. Like if
mm,
you and risks and creativity. Like if you have some time, like between crypto, and I'm not advising anything on, I'm just saying if you are into certain things that are more creative that didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago,
mm,
and you want to take some risk on those, you certainly could set yourself apart, or even running an online business, or being a content creator and starting a
mm,
side hustle that way and just stacking your chips. There's a
yeah.
lot of things that I think, even though housing prices have gone up to make it cost prohibitive for a lot of people that are younger right now, I also
Mm,
think that there's a lot of opportunity for them to be able to make money in different and creative multiple channels that weren't
mm.
available 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, well put, well put. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy, for taking the time and having a great chat today. Um,
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
yeah, and then lastly, how does people find you? How do people connect with you?
Yeah, so I love sharing on social media. My handles are all the same across the different channels. It's Royce, Royce, as in Charlie, E as in Echo. So Royce of Real Estate. And I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok these days.
Awesome. Awesome. And then we're going to put that on the show notes below as well if you are watching YouTube, but otherwise we're going to be putting in the podcast in the description part as well. Awesome. Thank you so much for
So
the show today. Thank you.
much.
And this wrapped up our another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. If you like what we do, please subscribe to us on YouTube and also give us a rating, 5-star ratings on podcast if you want to. And we look forward to talk to you guys next time.